Well, hello everyone. You got Ryan in the house and recording live from Seattle, and you got Mike with me today.
Coming at you from a nice King Suite in Hillsboro, Oregon.
That's awesome.
Pretty nice, don't you think?
So we got yeah. It looks really nice. It looks like it's almost staged.
You
Mike.
can't beat hotel artwork.
That is true. That is true. I got my sketchy bedroom with one lamp in the background. It looks like a torture chamber or something.
You look like
that.
you live in a mental asylum.
It really
have.
does. There's no pictures. There's nothing here.
Mm-hmm.
That's wild. Well, I mean, this kind of leads into some exciting news. So, if this was just a podcast, we probably wouldn't be talking about what we're seeing. But we are actually now going to be live. Well, I guess not live because we're not recording live, but we can in the future. We have that capability. We'll be on YouTube. We'll be on TikTok. We'll be on Instagram. So we've got the username, or you can add us on Instagram at I've Been Thinking Pod. And so we'll hopefully have all of those out by the time this video comes out. So you can continue listening on the Spotify. We are now on Apple Podcast, on Google Podcast. So totally fine if you want to just listen to the podcast, but if you want to see us in video, because Mike has a delicious face, then head over to YouTube and you can see our actual faces and you can see the podcast with video, which is quite fun.
Never say that again.
So beyond that, we definitely appreciate people if you feel like you've gotten some benefit out of the shows or really enjoy listening. If you can share this with other people, if you can review us on any of the platforms I just mentioned, that would be fantastic. But yeah, that about wraps up the news. So you ready to jump in, Mike?
That would be the place where we put a intro song. We'll get there.
Oh, true. Yeah, well, baby steps. We have to think of some music that really difference. All right, sounds good. So today, I've been thinking about this. I think we talked before the show of I can go this avenue or that avenue. So today I want to have a conversation around conversation.
Oh,
what do you think about that?
I thought you had stuttered, honestly. Let's have a conversation about conversation. I like it.
Sounds like it.
Let's go.
So the reason is I feel like I find a lot of value in talking with others, but not high level conversations, more like diving deep into something or really just having this curious thought and exactly what we're doing on this podcast. It's kind of how it started. And so I thought it'd be a perfect time to talk about this on the actual podcast because this is kind of what created the podcast originally. So I want to see your thoughts on why do you think conversation is important? What kind of gets you energized to have conversation? Are there times, well, I mean, there's probably times when you don't feel like having conversation. So.
Yeah. I'd say most of the time I don't want to talk to people. That's just generally true. But it's kind of what you said.
No way.
I enjoy having good conversations. I very much could do away with small talk. So if you make a distinction right off the bat, conversation versus talking at each other, there's a big difference. Or maybe discussion. Okay. Discussion, I think, is definitely a good word for actually exchanging ideas. I like that. So I don't remember your question. Why is it good?
So,
why is it useful? Yeah.
I guess there's not a direct question. It's just why do you think it's useful? Like you mentioned, you don't really like to have small talk, but you like to have maybe deeper dives. Why have one over the other?
I don't know. Do you like small talk?
I feel like it's hard to have a deeper conversation with someone you just met. So I like it in the way that I appreciate it as maybe an icebreaker to feel out someone. But beyond that, to me it's almost it's a waste of time. It could feel transactional. So
yeah, I feel like when I meet somebody, it's nice to talk about, kind of surface level things, just to be polite. There's nothing wrong with that. But I feel like if I spend any time with somebody more than just in passing, I'm always trying to make them uncomfortable. Ask them something that they didn't think they were going to have to answer, or bring up something to talk about that's just more interesting than, I don't know. It's boring, why talk about stuff that nobody wants to talk about? I guess is my perspective. So, well, and
Yeah,
then
that's
like the
fair.
stupid saying, don't talk about sex, politics, and religion. It's like those are
Yeah.
like the best things in life. Why? What are we gonna not talk about them? That doesn't make any sense to me. So, yeah, instead of why is conversation useful, it's like what makes conversation so good, or what makes a good conversation.
Yeah,
Those are
and
interesting
I
questions.
think you hit on a good point. I took like some notes like beforehand, just like scratched out some stuff when I was putting like the beginning show notes on it for what to bring up, and what you just mentioned, like, oh, we probably should talk about politics or sex and stuff like that. I think it's a rough topic to talk about because people, or at least some people, assume, and sometimes it's not assumptions, it's true that you just get into these massive arguments where it's like, hey,
Right.
I have my opinion, you have yours, and there's no middle ground. And so I think one of the really good points that I feel like I've actually learned from you quite a lot is when you're having a disagreement, it's basically an opportunity to grow, and
Hmm.
you almost approach it with curiosity of, hey, like you might be right, you might think you're right, but you can also learn something, and you might be swayed in a certain way. So I think that's where a lot of like stuff starts to clash.
Totally. Yeah, just the assumption that somebody else knows something you don't, right? Or the recognition that I know certain things, but I'm also limited, and necessarily everybody else has something else to offer me. Like that's why you talk. Um, yeah, I like the idea of being curious in a conversation. That helps a lot because if you go in not wanting to listen to somebody, like what's the point? You're not having a conversation.
Mm,
You're preaching, right? And that's fine. Maybe preaching is
that's
good
true.
every once in a while, but one directional conversation is not conversation, right? Uh, it's not a discussion. But yeah, I think you're.
So what?
I was gonna say I think you're exceptionally good at just being curious and asking people questions, and I
Mm,
think that's such a good way of starting conversations is just the genuine questions that we have of each other. It's like, why the heck did you do that? You know, it's such a genuine thing that we all feel. If somebody does something, you just go, if you're honest about it, it's like, what were you thinking? Like, why would you do that? Or why do you believe this? It's like nobody wants to ask those questions though. For some reason, we're like timid about asking the questions that we really want to know the answer to. But I think that curiosity is important because
yeah, I
without it,
feel
you
like
just
for me, like, no, go for it. Say you're going to say without it, then what?
no. I was just gonna wait until you start talking again. I got nothing.
Come on, man. I think there might be like a pause. So like I feel like it sounds like you're silent. So I'm like, okay, look, let me say something. All right, I'm gonna give myself a longer pause next time. And maybe I'll edit this out. Honestly, I'll probably just leave it in. I'm lazy. I'll probably just leave this in. But but I think from what you were saying before, uh, I think it's important for people to realize that like it's okay to ask, like, I mean, okay, I feel like this is like a really common thing of, okay, don't ask like a dumb question, but to me, like, I feel like every question I ask is dumb, so I'm like, then I have no questions to ask, so I might as well just ask the question because it like doesn't matter. And I feel like
Yeah.
I started getting super curious because when I've had conversation with people, it's like I honestly felt this way of, I feel like I have nothing beneficial to add to this discussion. So the only thing I can do to have a discussion with people, because I really enjoy them, is just to ask questions. Because without
Mm.
that, I'm screwed because I really feel like I bring nothing to the table. And slowly I started to realize, oh, like maybe there's stuff I could say, but that's why I guess I became curious because it's like, well, I got nothing to add, so I might as well just ask questions.
Hmm. Do you really think that? You really think you got nothing to add?
I don't think that anymore. Oh, I don't know. I feel like I don't necessarily think that anymore. A lot of times I like listening, mostly, I guess there's two reasons. Well, one of them, I feel like sometimes I can't comprehend what people are saying because it's like, whoa, like that just blew my mind and it's going to take me some time to process.
Hmm.
And I think the other thing is I'm, like, I'm so, I guess it goes on with the first one. Like when you say something, like it takes me some time to like actually put that in my head and think about. So for me to give you a solid like reaction or something that can say as a response, I don't want it to just be some like sort of short answer. Like I want it to be
Hmm.
something that can actually help in the conversation. But yeah, I think for the longest time, to me, it's like I don't think I have anything to add to the conversation. I feel like I feel differently now, but I did for a long time of like, I don't think there's anything I could add.
Yeah, that's an interesting point for why you wouldn't have better conversations is if you're yeah, if you're feeling that way, that makes it difficult. That's interesting. I've never thought of that. Yeah, so then your equation becomes you have to have enough, self-confidence in yourself that you have something to offer, and then recognize that the person you're talking to has just as much, if not more, to offer. And by discussing, you're each kind of giving each other a gift, right? Like you get to learn from my knowledge, and I get to learn from your knowledge or your personality or whatever it is. Yeah, that's an important point, though. That's cool that you feel like you have more to offer now, because that would be difficult to have a conversation if you didn't add anything, right? You're just listening to somebody. You have nothing to add, right?
Yeah, but it's funny because you say that, but the amount of people I feel like I've met throughout my life that honestly, they don't want you to say anything back because maybe they're venting or they just want you to sit there. Like, there's probably a good amount of people that like that, but you're right. I mean, it might help them in that moment, or it might help them for like a short term. You can't have a meaningful conversation from that.
Yeah, so I think that's a good point. There are a lot of different ways that people converse, right? Where we just share. And one of those, could very well be, an important one where somebody's talking so that they can say something they need to say, and maybe you need to listen, or vice versa. There's other ways, but maybe there's a distinction between conversation and discussion being whatever the definition is. We'll say that discussion means two people talking about what's true, trying to decide what's true through speech. That's what I would call discussion. Like, did you do Socratic discussions when you were in middle school or whatever?
I don't think so.
No, we always did those in, like English class. Everybody would go read a book, and then you would make your notes on the book, and then you'd come in, and there'd be, you'd have a group of 10 people, and then everybody would have their notes, their thoughts on the reading, and then you would go around, and it would be like, here's what I think, and then next person would talk, and they would say, I thought that too, and I also thought this. Like, that was the Socratic method, Socrates, right? That his whole, I guess all of the records we have of him are just walking around asking people questions, challenging what they believe, and then talking, and then finding some truth at the end of it. And so the idea that you could do that, you could have a discussion where I talk and I say something useful, I make some claim or make some observation, and then on the back of that you say something else that adds to it or shapes it differently or refines it or says, no, that's not right, this is right. To do that over and over and over again, like, that's what a better way to find truth than just sitting in your dark room with one candle, like thinking really hard, just easier. It's outsourcing, right?
Yeah, that is true. So I take that back. I did do that when I was younger, and I distinctly remember it. But the reason why I gave my answer is because I wasn't a part of it. So every time we had to read a book and discuss it, I never read the book, and I'd always go to the bathroom. So I never partook in it, but we definitely did it as children, and I honestly regret that, because you're right. Like, I actually didn't realize the power of conversation until, like, honestly, I'd say, like, not too long ago. Like, I spent quite a long portion of my life having light conversation, having stuff that's like transactional, and honestly, like, there's a lot of fulfillment in having these kind of conversations that I just missed out on. But I think going back to a point that you mentioned before, like, having the discussion, going back and forth is really important. But what are your thoughts on the power of, like, validation? Like, when someone feels validated, like, to me, that's like a very, like, powerful thing. The fact that someone is being listened to and understood, compared to, hey, let's have a discussion, and, like, maybe them not feeling that way, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point that your question, or you brought in, have a conversation about conversation, right? Discussion might be a more
Yeah.
like philosophical thing. You're talking about what's true. You're trying to figure out what's true. Or conversation, I think, yeah, like some of the most valuable, maybe one of the most valuable aspects of a conversation is to be validated, right?
Hmm.
So, like, yeah, I think that's true. I think that's definitely true. Um, Especially if you feel like you have something to say, or you need to say, like, you need to get something off your chest. Sometimes that's validating. Just being able to talk to somebody and them not run away screaming, right? Or hit you. like that somebody would just kind of accept you for what you tell them. And we were just talking about this vulnerability, right? That would be the same idea. That if you're vulnerable and somebody, bare minimum accepts you, but then on top of that validates you, how valuable that is to your own sense of yourself. Yeah. Do you? When do you feel? When do you feel like validated in conversations? Like, is that something you seek out, or like, do you feel like you feel that often?
Yeah, I think it's a line that I try to draw sometimes, because a lot of times conversation is not like, if I try to seek validation, then I'm kind of missing some of the mark on a discussion, because like
Hmm.
if I'm just trying to seek validation, then I might not be open to other people's opinions and feedback then. And so I think then it becomes a problem. But I can tell during certain circumstances with the people I talk to in like the group I'm around in Seattle, there's times when someone just wants to feel validated, and it's like,
Yeah.
hey, like I don't really want, even though like a discussion's about perspective, it's like, I don't really want your perspective, let me just vent, or let me just like see what you think. I've had like a rough day, and to me, like, you pick up on like these social cues and you have that, but I don't really enjoy those conversations, because it's basically going back to, hey, I'm just sitting here listening, which is great. You like, people need that in their life. It's just like, we need that. But I really enjoy the conversations where it's like, hey, like, I'm not saying I'm right, but can I at least provide honest feedback instead of just making like you feel better? And I know
Mm.
sometimes that's there's a right time and right place for that, but I feel like, at least for me, there's times where I get excited about something, like maybe this podcast, and for someone to go along and say, well, it's not really practical because nobody wants to hear what you and Mike have to say, because you guys say the most nonsense stuff, and you know what, that might be true.
Probably
And
true. Yeah.
that's fine. But you know what, like, I'm excited about it, so you can give me validation, but I'm not seeking validation from you because I'm excited. So
Mm. Yeah. What an interesting point that you can't, like you said it earlier, to not go into a conversation seeking validation because it messes everything up. But
mhm.
but then what a good thing it is when you have a conversation, somebody validates you, right? It's kind of like you can't quite look for it, but
Yeah.
once you get it, it's really good, and it's really even better when you're not looking for it. Um, yeah, that's it's a paradox, right? It's kind of like, I don't know. The thing that came to mind was money, right? The difference between working to try to make all this money so that you can be wealthy, and then the result that you get at the end of that, versus working for some other purpose, for some other meaning, and then finding wealth through it, and then being able to just be thankful for the wealth, right? It's kind of the same idea that by not seeking the validation, you're able to actually accept it. Sometimes it's clear though. You're like, I need to, like, it's nice to be validated, but sometimes it's different. Where you go, I feel like I gotta say, like, I have to say something, or I have to,
Yeah.
be vulnerable in a certain way, and that the validation is actually really important. So I don't know if it's like completely one way, but you said something else that I liked, but I don't remember. So
All right, well, let me pivot it, because it goes off of what you just said. If you remember what you're thinking of before, just shout it out, man. Just interrupt me. But for feeling this validation, I guess when I go into a conversation, the
uh,
more important thing than validation is, oh, you remembered?
yeah, I did.
Okay, you go for it. Mine can be after.
Well, the idea that like validation's really good, and but then the idea of not needing it from other people. I
Hmm.
don't know if that's where you were going to go, but that's also a tricky like balance in the same kind of way, similar in that it's maybe paradoxical that you need validation, but to be the kind of person that is dependent on other people's validation, that's not a very good situation, right? But it is a healthy part of your life. Like, you need people validating you. You just can't be dependent on it. Like, you can't be desperate for it, but it's necessary. So it's just kind of it's a tough place to be. So the question to me then just becomes, if I'm not depending on other people's validation, then where do I get that validation? Does it come from me? Does it come from my friends? Does it come from my wife? Come from my family? Does it come from God? Right? That would be a useful thing to have sorted out in your life, right? That, like, your identity, like, that's kind of what validation means, right? That your identity is like good. So to like know that without other people being dependent on the other people for it seems important. So that was my thought.
And it's a good thought, and I think it actually relates back to like the podcast we just did. So for those of you that are listening and haven't listened to the last podcast, go listen to it right now. But it talks about like authentic self and your beliefs, and I agree. Like, if you don't know, like, I guess if you're someone that always like talks yourself down, then it's really hard, because you'll know if nobody's giving you validation and you're always talking yourself down, then you're fucked. You're screwed. But if you are able to say, wow, like you can look back and say, I did a really good job with that, and you have this understanding with yourself of like, I've accomplished this today, or I accomplished that the other day, then yeah, I think it's fine. But it's always nice to have that balance. Like, imagine you doing something really great, and you can tell yourself you did this really great, and then everybody, friends and family, look at you and say, I mean, that's all you did. Like, no matter what, even if you can get self-validation, it's gonna feel shitty.
Yeah.
So I think it's good to have, and I think it's good to surround yourself with people that, can mix and match both. Like, you get those people that are, well, we say, oh, like, great job. Like, I don't know, there's people in my life that no matter what I do, like, I can chop up my finger and they'll be like, that was a really good chop, right? And like, I'm very proud of you for that chop. It's like, I mean, it's nice to have that, because sometimes you need that in life, but yeah, it's hard to have like an actual discussion. But I guess what I was leaning into before is, for me, I don't seek validation more than I seek being understood. There's a lot of people that I think when I have a conversation, and it's maybe because I explain things poorly, or maybe I talk too fast, where it's hard, because like, we'll try to have a discussion or conversation when it sounds like what I just mentioned was like kind of just like not even mentioned in the next part of like what we're talking about. And to me, like, I don't know, I just get like a bit worried of like, should I be a better speaker in some sense? Did they not understand it? Are they afraid to ask me like what I just meant by that? And so I think when me and you talk, like, if I don't understand something you're saying, because you've definitely used words before that I'm like, I don't know what the hell that means, man. And I'm like, you gotta just explain that. And I don't have a problem with that, because at least now we can move forward with the rest of the discussion. And I'm not saying I use big words around people. I think I just might use confusing words. And so to me, like, the most important thing is having and being understood. Without that, then it's like, I don't know. I don't like having discussion without that.
Yeah, it seems like it would be useless if what you're saying is not understood.
But you'd be surprised that like conversation can carry on with two people totally misunderstanding each other.
Yeah, but it can be a dead, right? Like, we know the difference. Everybody feels the difference between a good conversation and a bad conversation, right? You go on a first date with somebody, it's evident immediately whether you've got a connection, right? Whether there's a spark. It's like, that's true not just romantically. It's true with you meet somebody, in a classroom or at work, and you hit it off, right? Like, what are we talking about? You're talking about the fact that you're able to have a conversation that for some reason is good or better than bad. I don't know. I think it probably starts with something like that you understand each other, maybe intuitively. I've never thought about that. While you're talking, the idea of, you've brought up validation and being understood. And I don't know where I heard this, but somebody one time, I think they were talking about love, and they described love as uh, being known and accepted. The idea of like being loved by somebody.
Okay.
If you look at the different permutations of that, right? If you are not known and not accepted, well, then you have no relationship, right? Basically you're strangers. You're completely isolated. If somebody knows you but they don't accept you, then you have a relationship, but it's not really loving because they're not accepting you for who you are. So there's that wall, right? Flip that. If you're accepted completely but you're not known at all, well, then it can't be that shallow, or it can't be that deep, right? It's pretty shallow. So, I accept you for everything you are, and you're great, but I know nothing about you. And then the fourth being fully known by somebody and fully accepted would be that kind of. I think that's a maybe more mature form of validation, right? Like how validating that'd be when somebody knows who you are for all your goods and your bads, accepts you for it, and then loves you, right? So that might be something that you can get in a conversation. It's maybe a bit bigger than a conversation, right? That's kind of something we long for in our life, in our relationships. But I think conversations do that, right? You can express that to somebody in a conversation. You can be interested in knowing them and then accept them with your words, or that's kind of what you were saying about being understood, because it does feel shallow, right? When somebody doesn't understand you,
Mm-hmm.
it's like, well, we're not getting anywhere.
Yeah, I think with that, like we were talking about being vulnerable in like the live podcast when we were talking about show notes and stuff like that. Like it's an important part when you're trying to look at like your beliefs and values, and for you to have that combination of both of what you just mentioned, like I
Yeah.
think that you'll probably need to be vulnerable, and you can't get that right. I mean, some people can, maybe like you might just open up to someone random, but that can take some time. So I, the way I think of it is like you're just chipping away when you meet someone. Like, okay, like can I say this and see how they react to it? Can I go that deep yet? Or maybe they don't want to go that deep, but maybe this relationship can never go that deep because there's some people that just honestly don't want to go there, and that's fine. It's
Mm-hmm.
just your limitation is the person that goes least vulnerable, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's why I like asking people questions that make them uncomfortable, because it's just a test. It's like we're sitting here eating dinner, and it's like, what do you think about the economy? Like it doesn't have to be the most important question, but just like if I probe you and make you talk about something that's outside of what normal people talk about in normal settings, and you're down for it, well, then who knows how far we can go, right? We can keep talking. But if you cut it off right away, then I'm like, all right, you don't want to talk. That's fine. We can just sit here and talk about the weather. I like the weather.
So your probing question is the economy. Is that what I'm hearing?
No, no. Usually it's just
Oh, okay.
spicier. Yeah. So I was driving in the car with somebody the other day, and we started talking about gentrification. That was pretty nice. That was a good
Okay,
one.
that's a spicy
Yeah.
topic.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'll definitely get those people that it's like, there's no way he just asked me that question, and there's some people that are
Oh
like,
yeah.
finally, this man asked me that question.
Yeah.
Been
Yeah.
waiting to talk about this.
It's a cool way to gauge somebody and get to know them.
Yeah, I feel like I got to come up with like a probing question now because I don't have one, but I feel like I should come up with one. It's like, all right, let me throw this line all the way down there and like see if it comes up, and I have to make sure it's not too far down there for him to just get up and leave and be like, we can never talk again.
That's such a terrible. That's like going on a first date with a girl with like 5 questions, like written on a sticky note. Like, here's what I'm gonna ask her. Can't do that. Well, okay, so that's an interesting point though.
Okay.
Good discussions are not scripted. Fair statement.
So I agree they're not scripted. I think it's still okay to have a starting block though.
Yeah, that's not what I said. But scripted would
Okay.
be like, we know what we're talking. Like, I know what you're gonna say, and then I say something back to you, and
Oh yeah.
it's comfortable. Uh, Obviously, nothing is scripted, but my point is that if good conversations are not scripted, then what makes a good conversation? It's something like, not having 5 questions to ask somebody on a date. It's, you start somewhere and then you see where it goes. But so that's the interesting part though, is like the best part of the conversation is when when it flows naturally.
Yes.
To me, right? You say something and then that sparks something in you, and then you now have a new insight and you can share it. And you're like working together on this thing that you don't quite understand yet. Like that's pretty crazy. I don't know what you think about that. Like what's going on when that happens? I don't know. What do you think?
I agree. Yeah, no, I agree 100%. I think that in my mind, I can like sometimes tell where the conversation's going, and I'm like, okay, let me get another question in the like in the chamber because this is clearly not going out. And a lot of times conversations like that when you meet someone new. But you're right, like the best conversation is when it's like I had no idea he was going to say that, but that brings it to a really good point of like there's a lot of stuff that you'll say that I've never heard of before that will spark something brand new that I'll put two connections together in my head. I'm like, whoa, like I didn't think of that, but it flows. You're right, it flows really well. And the way I can tell is, I mean, I always have a watch on, and so I'm always like checking the time and stuff like that every now and then. And when I just keep putting a new question or whatever in my head of like, okay, I'll ask them this next. Like I'm pretty cognizant of like, okay, like this is how much time has passed. Like this is kind of going a bit rough. But when conversation really flows, it's like, whoa, it's been like 15 minutes since we actually started on this. Like, I don't know. I love that because then you can actually start getting somewhere with someone.
Yeah, I agree. So you said sometimes somebody says something and you make a connection. What is going on when that happens? Like, have you ever thought about this? When you're just sitting there and you're thinking about like the hot dog you had at the fair the other day, and then you're thinking about the hot dog, and then it's like, holy crap, that thing over there makes sense. Like, what is that?
Wait, that's
I know I sound crazy, but that happens all the like. Thoughts are so weird.
Yeah. So this is why I think conversation's so important, because like if you were sitting alone in a room with a candle, like you were mentioning, like you're not going to think of these things. And I was looking some of this. Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, thoughts. You do have your own thoughts. Like I'm saying that conversations and thoughts are similar, right? Like if you sat on your own, sometimes things just come into your head, and it helps when there's two people because you say something, and that's very similar to me sitting alone and having a thought come into my head. You've thrown the thought into my head, right? But when let's say you throw a thought at me, but then now I make a connection over here, it's like you've thrown a thought in, but then something else has also put another thought in, the connection. Like, that's so weird.
That's fair. And the way I think about it is very similar. Like you could sit there, I don't know why, I just keep picturing you with a candle in like a dark room, just sitting there.
Like this, yeah.
Just thinking.
I do it every Thursday night. Yeah.
I had a feeling. But with that, you can have thoughts pop into your head, but those thoughts are probably revolved around your interactions with life and like your worldview and your family and your friends. And then when you bring someone new, then it's like you mentioned, you can still get these thoughts, but like now it's just these new neurons that could be firing in your head, because it's like I would have probably never thought of that.
Okay, so I'm gonna drill down on this. When you say the thoughts are coming from like your experiences and the things you've been through and all that kind of stuff, are you talking about subconscious? Like they're popping out of your subconscious, and so it's just all the things. It's like the milieu. It's everything that you've seen and heard and that we're talking about.
Yeah, so the way I feel with thoughts is if I'm trying to think of something and I'm trying to have deep thought, nothing unconscious is going to pop up. It's very conscious and it's very hard for me to be creative. But if I'm doing like some random stuff, I'm not thinking about or I don't know, say I want to create this new idea. I don't think about that new idea because it never works, at least for me. I'll go for a walk. I'll do whatever. I'll read a book. And for some reason, something will spark something and make that transition to my head that maybe was unconscious. But in my mind, like those thoughts are limited in a box because of my experiences, what I'm experiencing in that moment maybe. But someone else who's experienced life completely differently has this own box. And now these boxes start to interlap and you get this. Okay, like the way I think about it is if you are, say I just moved to Seattle and I have no friends, and I might have talked to you about this concept before, and you meet someone and they have no friends. Great. Now you both have each other and that's it. say you meet someone that has an that's not a bad thing. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying, but think of the other scenario of you meet someone who's born and raised in Seattle, has an entire friend group here. You make one connection, now you can basically have this entire network of friends in their circle. So that's the same way I think about thoughts and when you talk to someone. If that makes any sense at all.
So the people who have no friends but meet each other, that's like your own thoughts. But meeting somebody with connections is like a whole different universe.
Yeah.
No, I think that's true. So you've kind of described, you, and then within you is like your conscious mind, but then around it is subconscious, and then next to it is like some other person with conscious and subconscious. Yeah. So like you're getting input from your non-conscious parts, but then you're also getting inputs from other people's
like to
parts.
me, like conscious and unconscious, like there's some connection that's formed between like a similar pattern. Like that's how, like, based off your experiences, you introduce someone new into, it's almost like a hop. It's almost like I could have never made that, or I mean, unless you had a similar experience.
Yeah. It is crazy. Like there's just the input, right? You say something to me. Like what you just said, pattern. Like what does that mean? The hop. Because I'm thinking you say something to me, but then it makes me think of something else. Like that's weird. Because I get the input, but what's happening in me then that's now grabbing this other thing? It just doesn't feel like I'm doing anything. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, it's just your brain just triggering. I guess the way I think about it is maybe there's two like neurons in your head that are completely separated.
Speak for yourself.
Whoa! What? I'm just gonna go on with my train of thought here, but because I know I'm gonna forget it. But if you have these two neurons, and they'll probably never form a connection in your life potentially. And someone says a thought that can connect them. Now, boom, they're connected in your head that might have been in completely different rooms.
No, I don't think it's neurons, though. How could it be neurons?
So, because, like, I know, what's the guy's name? Andrew, I'm going to butcher his name, so whoever's listening, don't correct me, because I know I'm probably wrong. Andrew Huberman, who is like a neuroscientist, he talks a lot about neuroplasticity. I feel like I'm pronouncing that wrong. And he's basically explains a lot about how you can, like, even no matter how old you are, you can like form these new connections in your head that otherwise might have not been there before. So I believe the same thing is true when you have like deep conversation.
I agree. But my point is what we're talking about, like what's going on when you're thinking or when you're making connections. I don't think that can be neurons, right? Like your thoughts. We don't know what thoughts are. Like you can't go find thoughts in your brain. Like they're outside of your brain, right? I mean, don't they have to be?
I don't know. I don't know. Like,
okay.
I mean, what do you mean outside? What do you mean thoughts are outside your brain?
Well, neuroscientists, I know very little about neuroscience, but
I don't either.
Electrical, from what I know, there's electrical things going on in your brain, right? You got tissue and cells and neurons, and there's synapses where the electricity is. And so we can go and we can observe the brain and we can say, hey, this person's laying in this scan thinking about this thing. Here's all of the electricity signals showing us that their brain is moving in this part, right? That's all fine and good, but that hasn't taught us anything about thoughts or imagination.
But when you're having conversation, like thoughts are flowing, like that's what's happening, and you have to recall that information. And to me, like that recalling of information is a spark in a neuron. That's just the way I keep saying the word neuron. I don't even know what a neuron is really, but
I guess.
Okay.
My point is that the distinction between, like, if you're going to boil down this whole not that you're doing this, but if you boil the whole conversation down to neurons and your brain firing signals, I feel like we missed the point, because I don't see you or me or anybody else as just a physical being. I thoroughly believe that we are a combination of physical and spiritual beings. And if that's the
Mm-hmm.
case, then your body is an instrument, to use a metaphor, being played by your spirit, right? So your
Okay.
brain has these signals in it, right? But those are just the sounds coming out of the instrument. That's not the thing playing the instrument, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, like if if we're thinking at all and it's not just our physical matter, then I have a mind that's outside of just my brain. You see what I'm saying?
I think I understand, and I agree. Like I wouldn't place it fully on these neurons that I keep talking about. I'm gonna after this podcast, I'm gonna look up what a neuron actually is and be like, I can't believe I just said all that stuff on the podcast. But I agree. The spiritual sense I think is very very important, because then if we remove that, we're just talking about like skin and flesh and the stuff that's like physical in our body. And I agree. I think a very big part of it is what we're like a spiritual presence, like paired with like our physical body. So I agree with what you're saying.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So I guess I don't know what I think about thoughts. Shoot, that was really stupid.
I was waiting for you to say something really good there, and I'm like, oh, come on, Mike.
I don't know what I think about thoughts because another one is dreams, right? Like we act like dreams are just normal, but they're so crazy that you're sleeping and then you have this whole imaginative narrative happen in your mind. It's like, where'd that come from? Like, that's not, like, that sure as hell didn't come from neurons, right? Like, that's not coming from electricity in your brain. That doesn't pass the sniff test, right? So it's like, where is it coming from? That it's a genuine question. I have no idea, right? Like, I mean, what else do you call it other than something, a spiritual thing outside of you putting inputs in your, like, I don't know. I've never had a good explanation of this, but it just seems to me like the thing that would be in the category of God instead of just physical, right?
Like dreams, or are you combining this
Yeah.
dreams and conversation?
Dreams and then thoughts being in this kind of the same category, yeah, of things
So
that I
what
don't quite control.
would you put like your imagination
Yeah.
in that category
Well,
too? Then
well, because there's things that you can control, right? Like I can think up something, right? I can design something intentionally. I go, okay, I want to do it this way and imagine it. But then on top of that, imagining a shape or a color or something, there can then be, inspiration that comes in that's not like, it's just weird, right? If you if you have, let's say you have a set amount of knowledge in your head, right? Maybe not in your head, but in your mind, to then have to come to any new insight, you would almost necessarily need an addition from the outside. Like, what would it even mean to have a new insight if you weren't adding to your current set of knowledge? You know what I mean?
so, but I'm wondering. I get what you're saying, but I'm also wondering, can you? I do understand. I don't think you're crazy, but I'm wondering, can you get this new insight from combining stuff? Like if you, let's just say you had a movie of King Kong, and then you had a movie of the Marvels, and you combine them together. Like technically, that's a new movie. There's two things that have been known. It's not there's no any new input, and you have that. So I'm wondering, like, I don't know if it's true or not, but for your dreams, like, there's definitely dreams that I have where it's like a recollection of like
Yeah.
4 or 5 different things smashed together, and it seems like a new experience, but really it's just a mixture of things.
That's a really good point, that something can be novel but not be like new, like completely new substance. Yeah, that's interesting. I like that. That's a good point. I don't think that explains everything, but I think that is a good point. Not all like new thoughts have to be brand new. They can be like relation. Interesting. Okay, so then conversation. Back to conversation. Conversations are obviously so good because you have somebody else helping you
Yeah.
along that way, right? Giving you new substance to think through or a new substance to interact with. So yeah, I mean, what could be better, right? What would be better use of your time than talking to somebody?
So I got a last question to pose for you then. If there's someone that's, I don't know, has a hard time having, maybe they have tons of conversation with people, but it's like light conversation. Do you have like a recommendation or a tip to try to get to a conversation that you would find a lot of fulfillment and enjoyment? So you mentioned like deeper conversation. Like, what do you think are some steps to kind of get that way?
Well, one of the first thing that comes to mind is, I mean, this is something that I feel like I went through. Was realizing that I felt like I was too polite and just like deferential, too agreeable. You know, like if I have nothing to say and I have no will to like go say it, then nothing's ever going to happen, right? If I really don't care, then I'm not going to ever get good conversations. So I think this might not be everything required for a good conversation, but that little bit of disagreeableness and willingness to like make some friction and to say, this is what I want and I'm going to go put it out there. I think that is kind of necessary for a conversation to happen, right? It's like you're putting your will onto somebody else, which if you're a little bit too polite, it's like, well, I wouldn't want to do that, right? You know, I wouldn't want to bring something up that somebody else doesn't want to talk about, or I don't want to bring something up if somebody doesn't want to talk, right? Or, you know, we've all been in conversations where somebody just talks and they just are talking about random things and it really doesn't have to do with you, right? So even the disagreeableness, because I'm not getting anything from this conversation, I need to go somewhere else and get it. I don't know. That's the first thing that came to mind is, yeah, like knowing what you want in a good conversation and then that being a place to start. I'm seeking a good conversation and I'm just going to get it. Maybe it doesn't have to be harder than that.
Yeah. I love that. I think that sums it up like really, really well. I actually really, really like that. I guess one thing I just want to say before we kind of take off here is for the people that are listening or watching, conversation I think is just super, super important throughout life. I've spent a lot of time just not having like deeper conversations, so I think it's just been super impactful in my life. There's a lot of people out there that probably crave this and maybe don't get it, or maybe there's people that have too much of it, but I would highly recommend that if you could have some deeper conversations, or if, I don't know, you see someone at a park and you just want to just talk to them and they might just say F off, but you know, you can have some great benefit and maybe you'll meet a new friend there. And I think there's more value there than something can hurt. So yeah, I just want to leave everybody with that, but thanks so much for tuning in today.
Cheers, man. It's been a pleasure.